Brian Gihm is a leading authority on SMRs in Canada, and he is the COO of Global First Power, an energy startup in Canada that specializes in project development, licensing, ownership, and the operation of small nuclear power plants to provide clean energy to industrial, commercial, and residential clients. We welcome Brian to come and speak to us today.
So my name is Brian Gihm, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Global First Power. We are an energy startup trying to construct, own, and operate nuclear power plants. And in traditional sense, that wouldn't make any sense. I mean, what's a startup doing with a nuclear power generation? It is only possible because we are planning to use SMRs, and SMRs are small enough such that even private entities like us can tackle the issue of building and own and operating it. So what is an SMR? Not everyone agree what SMR is. It's more of a marketing term. It's very generic, but if you look at the International Atomic Energy Agency's definition, it is a small reactor that can produce up to 300 megawatt of electricity. And SMRs generally have advanced engineered features, and they are deployable either as a single unit or multiple units. And they can be built in factories and shipped to utilities for installation as demand arises. So these are generic definitions of SMRs. Some of the conventional power reactors are under 300 megawatts. So SMR is just, it's a little bit hard to define, and regulator will not agree to this definition. How new is an SMR? It's not new. All the reactors are very small. Like if you look at the US shipping port reactor, it was 60 megawatt. If you look at Canadian NPD reactor, nuclear power demonstration, it was 22 megawatt. If you look at the Russian Obinsky power reactor, it was 6 megawatts. But reactors became much, much bigger as time passed. And the reason is that by building larger power plants, you can take advantage of economies of scale. So the idea was, let's build a larger plant and reduce the unit cost of electricity. It worked really well to a certain level, but the model started to break down. One of the reasons was that reactors became so big and project management became so complex. And after 3 Mile Island in the West, governments stopped building nuclear plants for good 30 years. So now, when people are trying to build these next generation nuclear reactors, some of them are as big as 1.7 gigawatt per reactor, people just couldn't manage the construction and project properly. And like the EPR project in Finland went way over budget, over time. And if you look at the AP1000 power plant project in the United States, it went over budget, over time as well, and actually bankrupted Westinghouse. So people started to change their approach to nuclear power, I would say about 10 years ago. Like, the idea was always there, but it started gaining some traction in past 10 to 5 years. People started to go back to small reactors. Okay? The rationale was that it is really difficult to finance $10, $20 billion for a project which may go over budget and over schedule. But it might be possible to finance $1 or $2 billion to build a smaller size reactors that can be built on time because you can modularize a lot of components. So in today, there are over 100 SMR designs being developed around the world. Many of them are water-cooled reactors, but there are lots of varieties in the design. So in the traditional world, we had PWRs, boiling water reactors, and pressurized heavy water reactors, such as CANDUs. Now, these SMRs are either integral PWRs, sodium fast reactors, molten salt reactors, gas-cooled reactors, molten chloride reactors. There are just so many varieties. It's a wild west of nuclear development. We generally put SMRs in two different categories. One is utility scale SMRs. These ones are roughly 100 to 300 megawatt per reactor. And there are microscale SMRs, which is anywhere between 100 kilowatt to 50 megawatt in sizes. So what drives SMR development? Well, first thing is, it's a small, it's a little bit easier to finance $100 million reactor project. And it can be even be financed by private sector participants. Construction time is faster, and capital redeployment cycle is much faster with SMRs, because the construction time may only be 1 year, so you can start producing power quite fast, and then recoup your initial capital investment through electricity sales, and redeploy that capital for the second and third and fourth units in the same plant. So that's another motivation. The last, modular construction is another drives, because if you look at conventional nuclear project, about 70% of the project cost is associated with the construction in case of AP1000. SMRs can be factory built and shipped in small modules to the site to be just dropped on a concrete pad and just bolted together. So you basically eliminate the construction risk from the nuclear project. And the last thing is the safety. So I'm not going to say that SMRs are safer than any conventional nuclear power plants. Always the idea is that by the time nuclear reactor is licensed for operation, it is safe. But SMRs change the safety concept slightly. By incorporating different by taking advantage of different physics characteristics and employing advanced engineering features, it tries to beef up the first 2 layers of nuclear defense and then try to save on the next 3 layers of nuclear defense, which is things like containment, evacuation plans, and emergency planning, etc. So if you actually look at the safety of SMRs as a whole, it's probably equivalent to conventional plants, but it's trying to shift the safety to fundamental physics. Canada seems to be a popular destination for many SMR developers. Today, there are 10 reactor vendors that is engaged with CNSC, Canadian Nuclear Regulator, for pre-licensing design review. And there are several companies who are engaging CNSC for actual licensing of the plants now. So when I was invited to come and talk about SMRs, the topic was about resiliency, and I didn't really understand what was the precise definition of resiliency, so I looked it up. What is resiliency? It's a capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. So I guess in insurance context, it's how quickly you can restore the communities or power systems after cat loss or a super cat type event. So I thought about what damages can occur to power systems during this catastrophe. Well, you can either lose transmission and distribution capacity, or you can lose generation capacity. And those are pretty much 2 main things to power systems. Transmission and distribution capacity loss is probably more frequent. If you look at this map, this is 2003 Northeast blackout. It started with, in the summertime, basically wires just sagging a little bit because of the heat and touching the trees. And it happened with one wire, and then actually happened to another wire, so to the same time. And for the utility that was in charge of that region had a computer glitch, so they didn't know what was going on. The screen of the computer didn't refresh. So people didn't, and electricity was just racing back and forth between wires and different grid connections and systems. And before people realized what was going on, we lost control of that grid. And my local convenience store gave me free ice cream because it was melting away anyways. So when you have centralized generation and long distribution system or model of the grid, the weakness is usually with the wires. You have millions and millions of kilometers of wires, which is very close to tree branches and whatnot, and that is usually the weakest point. When hurricane hit Virgin Islands this last year, wires came down. When there was ice storm, transmission lines basically came down, and it took months. Sometimes it took months to rebuild some of these transmission network. So one of the mitigation for this problem was to create distributed generation, right? Also microgrids. It wasn't started as a solution to this wire problem. It just happened. It started in the United States when one of the law was enacted that took away the monopsonies of the utilities. So independent power producers were able to produce some powers using wind and solar, and utilities had to purchase those power. And that was probably the start of this distribution generation trend in 21st century. It's nothing new. When all the power plants were initially built in late 1800s and early 1900s, all the plants were private plants, and basically people had generators in the building basement and little core dumping chute on the side, and wagons were delivering coal. But it also became a recent trend adopted by the high-tech companies like Google's, Apple, Facebook, these companies who rely on 100% reliable electricity to maintain their servers. They basically said that, yeah, we cannot take the risk of utilities providing electricity to us, and we'll just build our own power plant in our basement. So by having these distributed generations and eliminating the wires, you reduce the risk of the power loss in catastrophic conditions. Another challenge, well, another possibility that can occur during catastrophe is basically loss of generation capacity. This is less frequent because many, the conventional power plants are fortified, and especially nuclear power plants. It is very well fortified generation source. So it is unlikely that nuclear power plant will stop producing power even under extreme weather conditions or earthquake events. However, the loss of generation has become a little more of a concern because we are relying more on distributed generation sources such as renewables. I just want to mention one thing, that renewable is not necessarily, like renewables and distributed generation are not equal thing, because some of the renewable power generation became very concentrated and they became extremely large. Like some of the solar parks in China, wind farms are reaching over like 6.8 gigawatts in capacity in a single location. That makes them susceptible to single cause failure. So what can happen now is that when you have a hurricane, you can simultaneously wipe out your solar farm, wind turbines, and your transmission lines in some cases. So how does SMR fit in this context of having distributed generation capacity? Well, SMRs are fortified source of power. They are hurricane and tornado proof. They're seismically qualified, so you can withstand 0.3 or higher ground acceleration. It comes with backup power systems on its own. It has a strict application of fire safety. It's generally airplane crash proof. It's very secure physically and with the security forces. Because SMRs typically use low enriched uranium, it is less susceptible to xenon poisoning time event. So in CANDU power plants or PWRs, if reactor trips and if you do not restart the reactor within like 30 or 40 minutes, you have xenon poisoning and you basically cannot restart the reactor for about 2 days. Because SMRs tend to use LDUs, they can come back to power fairly quickly even after reactor trips. And many of them comes with enough fuel in the core that can last 20 or 30 years lifetime. So if all the infrastructure is wiped out in an area and extra fuel cannot be delivered, like that will be the case even if you have a diesel generator, diesel fuel will have to be delivered to the disaster area. SMRs are not concerned with that logistics issues because it already contains enough fuel to last about 20 to 30 years in some cases. And a couple of other benefits are basically the plant can provide fully dispatchable power and doesn't generate greenhouse gas. So It is a nice replacement for diesel backup generators with more benefits and added security features. So just my conclusion is that resiliency comes from diversity, right? It's like, I'm not saying that SMR is the only solution that'll make the system resilient, but it will be important to have a good mix of different power generation sources in the system to create community resiliency for power.